at the time that you are hearing this podcast, my wisdom teeth may or may not be pulled out and I may be completely incapacitated. So today, Connor and I are actually recording a bonus episode. We're covering 3 news stories today. So even if my mouth does not function, you are not missing out on the news. The 3 things we wanted to talk about are, number 1, ChatGPT has gone completely off the rails. No one knows why. Number 2, Google has released Gemini and a new update to Gemini that maybe will win Connor and I back. We're saying a maybe for now. And the third thing is that Google DeepMind is trying to, I think, win over some hearts and minds with essentially releasing an open source model, something I said they should have been doing from the start. So let's get into all of this. First off, Connor, what have you been seeing on Gemini? Have you been sold yet?
Yeah, let's start there, right? Because this is potentially huge news, right? Gemini 1.5, and when it dropped, I think everybody was like about to sort of say, like, look how big this is. Literally, it'd be funny if you get to their laptop, Sora came out and just blew up the internet. Like, it's just like, you gotta almost feel bad for Google at this point. I do think it's interesting that Google sort of like is really taking a huge kind of like PR approach to this, right? Sort of like I heard, I think Paul Reiter was talking about, it's like, why is Sundar Pichai sort of like doing these announcements? And he has a fantastic podcast as well, fantastic LinkedIn. And I think that, you know, I was thinking about that too, but I think that a lot of this is like the CEO game, right? Because like Zuckerberg is like doing an absolutely phenomenal job. And you have, I don't know, like you just have like OpenAI and Microsoft and even Anthropic and all these things, like with all these like incredible leadership moves over and over again. And with Google, it just feels like it's kind of like falling on its face a little bit. So anyway, so I think that it's interesting, first of all, that Sundar Pichai keeps coming out and saying like, this is my thing. Like, even though, you know, it's really a DeepMind thing more than anything else, maybe, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But point being around Gemini, I will say this, that, you know, people that I trust, like the Ethan Mollets of the world and you know, Jason Galea is on LinkedIn, and he's doing a lot of, you know, running a lot of tests on this and stuff like that. And just other people saying the context window is actually holding up. To me, Jane, this was the big question, because Gemini is really kind of hit or miss. Hopefully they're doing a little bit of a better job with allowing you to actually ask questions. You'd be like, hey, what do you think if Taylor Swift wrote a song? They'd be like, I don't want to talk about Taylor. You know what I mean? Like, it's so careful. The guardrails are so high around it. It's really annoying. But when people start saying that it's actually pretty good at recalling information, because as you remember, this was Anthropic and Claude's problem when you put, you know, whatever, 100-page document in there, could it remember things in the middle? And if it can actually do that, well, the thing I was writing about was that for like small, maybe very small businesses, but more like kind of big teams or individuals or academics, tossing all their stuff in there and being able to conjure up their stuff. If Google can do that with fidelity, that feels actually like huge, right?
Yeah, 100%. I've seen a bunch of posts on X, which I think are definitely going to make me give this a second chance, where they've said they've uploaded like full-on books, they've asked it questions, and with very high fidelity, it's able to pull out answers from like the whole book. Typically how these AI models worked and what they struggled with in the past was that if you give it a big document or PDF, it was like good at getting stuff from the beginning or the end, but it kind of skipped stuff through the middle. It struggled with that. And a lot of people are like, well, that's just how humans are. Like, we kind of like skim the beginning, and the end and the middle is kind of like, you know, a wash. But it's like, yeah, you need like to kind of know what's going on. And an AI model is not a human brain. I would actually like you to remember the whole thing, because that's what I'm using you for and not my human brain. So I think that this has some potential to do really well and to be a really good tool. Okay, the other thing that I would love to get your opinion on right now, Connor, is ChatGPT going off the rails. Have you experienced this? People are posting this all over Twitter. They're also posting it all over Reddit. Apparently, they're wondering what is going on because all of a sudden ChatGPT is speaking Spanglish. We're seeing screenshots where it's like half Spanish, half English. Apparently, it's threatening users. It said to someone, "I'm in the room with you right now." It was a little startling. Or it's just babbling complete like nonsense. And lest you think this is some sort of like cherry picked, act like a crazy person, tons of people are posting these screenshots, and OpenAI themselves has said, we're monitoring the situation. The issue has been identified and we're trying to remediate it, and they're investigating it. So they're actively working on this.
So that's what I was going to say, right? Anything, I don't trust anything until OpenAI comes out and says something. VentureBeat has a great article on this where they were saying at 3:45 Pacific Standard Time on February 20th, which was, Tuesday or whatever. OpenAI is aware of the issue. By like whatever, 7 minutes later, it said it's identified the issue and was remedying it. By 5 p.m., it's like continuing to monitor the situation. That's when it actually freaks me out, because you're right. Twitter blew up about this. X blew up about this. Obviously, the internet blew up about this, sort of saying like in the small blew up way that is our bubble. But the interesting thing to me is just, again, Jaden. So I have this like AI Mindset newsletter and this whole platform, all that kind of stuff, talking about, and the premise behind it is that if you just think this is like normal software, you are never going to be able to use this really well. And this is just another example that highlights the fact that this is software that doesn't act like software. And even the creators of this don't know exactly what is happening with this. And I think that, and by the way, I have no inside information on this, but what I have seen with OpenAI is that when they tweak something, they're tweaking essentially a black box without really knowing all the other voodoo and black magic that's happening in their model. And so it might have just been one of these things. Now, there's going to be like things like, oh, February 20th is historically, the Mayan Indians, no, it's not, like, no conspiracy theories here. It really is just, I think they probably tweaked something, and OpenAI is tweaking a lot. And I think it just kind of temporarily went off the rails. I didn't experience any of this, Jaden. I don't know if you did, but I don't know.
Good for me. No, yeah, I haven't experienced anything. It's been working good for me. I think it is kind of a select group of people that just kind of got these crazy responses. But one other thing I want to bring up, to your point, this is not typical software. This is the same thing with the Sora video AI model that OpenAI has released. Thing, so here's what you typically would have to do for the Sora AI video model. You typically have to train a model to understand physics in order to, and this is what like the film industry has done for years when they do, CGI, and they have, for example, like a scene and they want the light to come in from one angle. They train like a physics model that understands how light reflects off of all the objects and everything, and it like adds that effect onto like the video that they've filmed in a studio to make it look like it's like in the sun or something like that, right? So what's incredible about Sora is it is not a physics engine. This thing was trained just on a lot of data, a lot of videos, and it's able to replicate and create like realistic looking things, but they didn't actually specifically train it to like understand how light passes or reflects off of things. It just sees it in other videos and understands. It's almost like how a human brain learns, right? Like intuitively, if I was just to like, I don't know, draw like a picture of an apple, I'd kind of like be able to shade it. And I'm not thinking about the physics of where the light necessarily is coming from or how it's reflecting, or I could just like visualize what something would look like. And in my visualization of like, let's say I'm trying to think of like a picture of a bridge over a stream with a bunch of trees around it, I can like picture that image and how the light looks and everything. And I'm not thinking of the physics of how everything's bouncing. My brain just kind of like has memories and remembers stuff. And that's what this video model's doing. To your point, same thing with ChatGPT, where this is not typical software. It's trained, it behaves in a certain way. And when we make a tweak, we don't understand. It's not like, oh, this line of code is broken. It's like something fundamentally happened that needs to now be fixed.
Yeah, so this is like what's so interesting about this, right? And kind of, again, to this point, don't treat this like software. Treat it like something else, because it acts like something else. And especially sort of, OpenAI can get crushed for this. Again, if Google did this, they'd get crushed. But this is what kind of like leads us into our third story. And I was reading a little bit about this on VentureBeat, which is one of my favorite publications around this. But Jaden, you were talking about this as well. This whole thing about Google DeepMind unveiling Gemma, which is this new open source model with, basically built from the same kind of like research and all that kind of stuff that Gemini was built on. And this is sort of like their way around this, right? It's their way of saying like, look, you guys are helping to build and train all this stuff and all that kind of stuff. So it's not really our fault. So when something goes off the rails, they can be like, hey, we're kind of all in this together. But I'm just wondering, like, look, DeepMind can do whatever they want. They're absolutely huge. But I'm wondering if this is more of is this like a competitor with like all the meta models, or is this a goodwill gesture, or is this to get developers on their side? Like, what is the point of Google DeepMind unveiling this sort of like new open source model, you think?
Yep, I think it's all the above. And I actually recently called for them to do something like this because it feels like they were losing the war where they were coming out with these AI models that weren't as good as ChatGPT, wasn't as cool. And I'm like, why does Google get such a bad rep for that? Whereas Facebook and Meta, they have their AI models, which may not be as good as ChatGPT, but it's open source. So everyone's like, well, this is phenomenal. And everyone loves Meta. They're getting all this positive publicity. You even are seeing this in their stock price doing well. So I think that Google is doing it for good publicity. They're also seeing companies like Mistral come out. Apparently on X, this is kind of trending that this is now beating Mistral, being an open source model with size and power. So I think we'll have to kind of test it to actually see where that lies. But yeah, I think they're now becoming competitive. They're gaining goodwill. They're going to get developers that want to work on this project. It seems interesting. It's not just the closed source Gemini. And if this thing isn't as good as ChatGPT, no one's going to care because it's open source and it's free for everyone to use. So, you get what you pay for. Whereas if you have to pay the same price as ChatGPT for Gemini, you want it to work as good as ChatGPT. So I think this is a good move for PR and everything else on Google's side.
That's where I wanted to go, right? I'm wondering about how much of a PR thing this is, right? Because I can't tell, Jaden, if you and I are just like two inside the bubble, and I would love to just, hear what people think about this kind of stuff just out on the street and everything else. Because again, Facebook and Meta, were really, crushed, obviously, and justifiably for what they did with social media and everything else. And obviously, I don't have to explain everything around that. But, they are gaining a lot of goodwill back there, sort of like getting people, like a lot of people were fleeing Facebook and then Meta, and then Meta just ended up cutting a ton of people anyway. But, this idea that OpenAI has a lot of people coming to work for them because of the culture, because of what they're doing, all that kind of stuff. And Meta, with an open source thing, starts to have like a lot of great people. I mean, you have Jan LeCun over there and everything like that. And Google has always been Google, but people want to take down the big guy, right? I mean, like, I'm always looking for Google to be like phenomenal. And we waited a year for Gemini, and then it came out and it was just kind of, not that great. And so I'm just wondering if this is like, how much of this is a PR move, and how much do you think people actually care about that? I mean, is it ultimately people will sort of like, this is the whole thing about Grok, right? People are like, oh, this is Grok. Yes, people who aren't politically incorrect. It turned out, by the way, if you saw the studies, that Grok was actually more politically correct than like ChatGPT, which makes me guffaw with delight. But anyway, I'm just wondering sort of like if this is sort of a play for users as well as developers. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think it'll work out well. At the end of the day, the reasons, it's kind of like Meta, like I wasn't a huge fan of a lot of things the company did. But I'm like, at the end of the day, I don't care necessarily why they're making these open source models, even if it's trying to save face or whatever. Like, I'm happy they did it. Same thing with Google. I'm really happy they've done this as someone that's creating a platform, right? AI box, where I can post all of these platforms. I'm super excited now to add Gemma to this, to add all of the open source models that people are going to be able to try. Cuts down my costs, cuts down users' costs. So when they're creating apps and making things, it's going to be cheaper for them. So at the end of the day, I think more competition is good, and I'm excited to see a lot of these open source models out in the wild and see how they actually play. In any case, this is fascinating. To everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to the AI Applied podcast. I hope that you all have an amazing rest of your day. If you enjoyed the episode today, make sure to leave us a review on Apple or Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and we will catch you next time.